In the oldest court in the galaxy, whole civilizations could be erased with a single sentence. The Hall of Judgment floated around a dying red star, cold and ancient, filled with carved names of species that had once mattered and were now dust. Every 500 cycles, the rulers of space gathered there to judge new worlds that had reached the stars. Some would be feared, some would be watched, most would be ignored. And sometimes, being ignored was the worst fate of all. Archon Salaith stood at the center of the chamber, tall and armored in a dark natural shell that shone under the pale lights. His voice rolled across the hall like distant thunder. "We begin the classifications." One by one, new species were displayed above the floor in shimmering light. A gas-borne intelligence from a distant nebula, a burrowing race from a crushing world of stone, a fungal hive that had spread itself across several planets. Each was examined, measured, and given a threat level. Numbers decided everything. A high rank meant attention, spies, treaties, or fleets. A low rank meant silence. At last, a young analyst stepped forward. His name was Tyan. He was slender, pale, and quiet, with the careful posture of someone who had learned not to waste words in rooms full of power. "Species designation 4217-C, he said. "They call themselves humans." A small blue world appeared in the air. Several delegates barely looked up. Tyan continued, steady but uneasy. "Origin world, Earth, outer edge of the Orion arm. They are carbon-based, water-dependent, physically vulnerable, and short-lived. Their average lifespan is around 80 local years." Soft laughter moved through the chamber. 80 years? Some in that room had lived long enough to watch oceans dry on distant moons. To them, human life sounded less like a civilization and more like a spark. But Tyan did not stop. "They have survived repeated extinction-level disasters on their home world," he said. "Ice ages, supervolcanoes, planet-wide plagues, massive impacts. They adapted to deserts, frozen lands, mountains, deep oceans. Their technological rise is also highly abnormal. They developed weapons capable of ending their own species before they achieved stable global unity." That earned a few more glances. Salaith tilted his head. "Your point, analyst?" Tyan swallowed. He had read the reports again and again. The numbers did not comfort him. They warned him. "My point," he said carefully, "is that their growth does not follow standard patterns. Most species take thousands of cycles to move from primitive industry to interplanetary reach. Humans advanced with dangerous speed. I believe they require a second review." Before anyone else could answer, High Seer Quorith rose. She was one of the oldest beings in the chamber, a master psychic from the Alinari collective. Her presence alone made the air feel thinner. "We have already reviewed this," she said, calm and sharp. "Interesting does not mean dangerous. Short-lived species do not shape galactic history. They burn fast, act wildly, and vanish before they can matter." Tyan wanted to argue. He wanted to say that fast-burning things could still start fires, but the chamber had already moved on. Archon Salaith raised his hand. "Species 4217-C, human, Tier 7, minor threat. 1 remote monitor, no diplomatic action." The judgment was entered. That was all. A world full of storms, wars, hope, and hunger had just been dismissed in less than a minute. Tyan stood frozen as the next species appeared above the floor. Around him, the great powers returned to their private talks, trade concerns, and military disputes. But he kept staring at Earth. at the blue world no one feared, at the species everyone had underestimated. And deep inside, where logic could not quite silence instinct, one thought refused to leave him. The galaxy had just made a terrible mistake. Far beyond that ancient court, on a small, restless world called Earth, humanity was already building the first answer the galaxy would wish it had never ignored. On Earth, no one heard the judgment. No alarms rang. No stars changed. No voice from the galaxy came down to warn humanity that it had been measured, dismissed, and placed in a file marked minor threat. Life went on as it always had, messy, loud, hopeful, divided, determined. And that was exactly why the danger was invisible. Because while the great powers of the galaxy forgot Earth, Earth refused to stay still. Decades passed. Cities grew taller, skies filled with traffic, machines, and stations hanging above the planet like metal constellations. Nations argued, cooperated, broke apart, and came together again. Humanity fought old problems with new tools and created new problems just as quickly. But through all the noise, one dream survived every generation. Reach farther, go beyond the system, touch the dark between stars. At first, the dream belonged only to scientists, engineers, and people brave enough to sound foolish in public. Faster-than-light travel had been called impossible by many of Earth's brightest minds. Even those who thought it might be possible said the energy demands were absurd, the mathematics unstable, the risks unacceptable. Humans heard all of that. Then they kept going anyway. At the Kepler Research Array, orbiting far beyond Mars, teams worked in shifts so long they stopped counting days. They failed over and over. Test drives collapsed. Probe ships vanished. One prototype folded inward like crushed paper. Another tore itself apart in silence, leaving only glittering debris and a list of dead names read aloud back on Earth. Still, they kept going. Because that was the strange thing about humans. Failure did not always stop them. Sometimes it only insulted them. Dr. Elias Chen stood in the center of the control room on the night everything changed. His eyes were red from lack of sleep. His hands shook from too much caffeine and too many years spent chasing a theory everyone else had nearly buried. On the main screen floated a small test vessel, barely larger than a transport shuttle. No weapons, no crew, just engines, sensors, and one last chance. Field stable, a technician whispered. Compression holding, said another. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Chen looked at the numbers, then at the dark shape of the vessel hanging against the stars. Begin Phase 3. For one awful second, nothing happened. Then, space bent. Not the ship, space itself. The stars ahead of the vessel seemed to pull inward, as if the darkness had become water circling a drain. Behind it, light stretched and widened. A trembling bubble formed around the craft, thin and strange and impossible. And then the ship was gone. The room went silent. A full 6 seconds later, a signal arrived from the outer marker beacon. The test vessel had crossed a distance that should have taken weeks. Someone started crying. Someone else laughed. Dr. Chen covered his face with both hands and sank into his chair, too tired even to celebrate. Around him, the room exploded into shouting, hugging, disbelief, and half-broken joy. Humanity had done it. Not cleanly, not elegantly, not perfectly, but it had done it. The first working fold drive was ugly, dangerous, expensive, and unstable by every graceful standard in the galaxy, which made it very human. Within months, the project stopped being a secret. Within 2 years, it became a mission. Within 5, the first colony ship was built. Its name was Endeavor. It was not pretty. Its hull was thick, practical and heavy with modular systems added by people who trusted backups more than beauty. It carried families, engineers, medics, builders, seeds, machines, embryos, archived knowledge, and enough hope to break under its own weight. Captain Alina Voss stood on its bridge before launch, watching Earth glow through the viewing glass. Behind her stood 3,000 souls. Ahead of her waited the unknown. And much farther out, drifting cold and unnoticed at the edge of the solar system, an old conclave satellite finally woke from its long boredom and sent a signal into the stars. Human activity change detected. Priority alert. No one important looked at it. Not yet. By the time the galaxy bothered to read the warning, the human ship Endeavor would already be face to face with the first empire foolish enough to tell humanity to turn back.
By the time the galaxy finally read the warning, the human ship Endeavor was already far from home and staring at 6 warships that looked built for one purpose only: fear. The black vessels hung in space like sharpened blades, huge and silent, their weapon lines glowing faint blue against the dark. Each one was several times larger than the Endeavor. Each one carried enough firepower to tear the colony ship apart in moments. On the human bridge, nobody spoke for a second. Captain Alina Voss stood very still, her eyes fixed on the tactical display. She had spent years preparing for engine failures, life support breakdowns, mutiny risks, supply loss, and deep space accidents. She had trained for almost everything. Not this. Lieutenant Commander Osai broke the silence first. Unknown fleet has locked targeting systems. 6 vessels confirmed. Heavy class. They are opening a channel. Put it through, Voss said. The face that appeared on the screen was hard and reptilian, with narrow yellow eyes and a jaw made for threat as much as speech. This was Commander Voroth of the DVEC Empire, a power so old and brutal that whole sectors moved aside when its fleets arrived. "Human vessel," the translator said in flat English. "You have entered territory claimed by the DVEC Empire. Power down your engines. Surrender your vessel. Prepare to withdraw. You have 100 seconds." The bridge stayed quiet. Voss studied him. Behind her calm face, her thoughts moved fast. Running was impossible. Begging would invite contempt. One wrong tone, one weak word, and 3,000 civilians would become easy prey. She stepped closer to the screen. "This is Captain Alina Voss of the United Earth ship Endeavor," she said evenly. "We are on a peaceful colonial mission. Registry shows this system as unclaimed. We have no hostile intent and no intention of leaving." On the other side of the channel, Voroth blinked once. He was not shocked by resistance from an equal. He was shocked by resistance from something he had already judged beneath notice. "You have 60 seconds, he said. Voss gave the smallest smile. "Then you already have our answer." The channel cut. A long breath moved through the bridge. Then alarm screamed. 3 plasma blasts burned across space and tore past the Endeavor's bow so closely that the whole ship shuddered. Lights flickered. Somewhere below deck, frightened children cried out as colonists grabbed for walls and straps and each other. "Warning shots," Osai said, voice tight. "No," Voss replied, eyes locked on the display. She turned to tactical. "Launch the swarm." The Endeavor did not carry giant cannons or polished war weapons. Humanity had not built its first great colony ship to duel empires. What it did carry was something cheaper, stranger, and far more human. 2,000 autonomous drones. They poured out of the launch bays like silver sparks, spreading into the dark in fast, shifting patterns. They were small, fast, and linked through a distributed combat network. No single brain guided them. They adjusted together, split apart,
reformed, and changed direction faster than any traditional military system could track. Vorath gave the obvious order: destroy them. The DVEC fleet opened fire. Dozens of drones vanished in flashes of light, but the rest kept moving. They did not fly like proper weapons. They behaved like a living storm. They twisted around plasma fire, slammed into sensor arrays, jammed signal lines, and clung to hull plating like metal insects. One DVEC cruiser lost forward sight, then another, then a third. The great Imperial formation began to stumble. For the first time in many years, Commander Vorath felt something cold move through him. Not fear, not yet, but uncertainty. And for an empire built on certainty, that was the first wound that mattered. The battle had only just begun, and before it ended, the DVEC Empire would learn the hard way that humans did not need bigger guns to become unforgettable.
The battle changed shape the moment the DVEC understood they were no longer dealing with prey. At first, Commander Vorath still believed the outcome was certain. His fleet had size, armor, discipline, and weapons powerful enough to break moons. The human vessel had one damaged colony ship, fragile engines, and a cloud of machines that looked more irritating than dangerous. But irritation turned into disruption. Disruption turned into disorder. And disorder, in battle, could become humiliation faster than any commander liked to admit. On the bridge of the Iron Tooth, warning lights flashed across every console. Reports came in too quickly for calm voices to hold them together. Forward sensor loss, 40%. Port communications interference. External drone attachment on upper hull. Targeting delay on batteries 3 and 4. Vorath stood with both hands locked behind his back, refusing to show the anger rising in him. Around him, his officers moved faster than before, but less confidently. Their weapons were stronger, their ships were larger, yet every advantage felt strangely heavier now, as if the humans had found a way to make strength clumsy. "Purge the hull," Vorath snapped. "We are trying, Commander." Trying. It was not a word he liked hearing in combat. On the Endeavor, Captain Voss watched the tactical map with a focus so sharp it bordered on cold. She knew they could not destroy 6 warships. That had never been the goal. The goal was survival, delay, confusion, enough pain to make the enemy question whether forcing the issue was worth it. It was a human way of fighting, practical, stubborn, and deeply unfair. "Drone clusters 6 through 9 redirect toward navigation fins," Voss ordered. 12 through 14 hit exposed array housings again. Her tactical officer nodded, fingers moving quickly. "Yes, Captain." The drones obeyed instantly. They curved, split, rejoined, and struck where the DVEC ships were least prepared. Not for glory, not for spectacle, just for effect. Outside, space flashed with blue plasma and silver debris. Hundreds of drones died. Thousands of tiny pieces of metal spun away into darkness. But enough got through. One DVEC ship lost synchronized thruster control and drifted out of formation for 11 precious seconds. Another fired too late and nearly clipped its own ally. A third, half-blind and badly jammed, turned broadside at the wrong moment and exposed sensor banks that should never have been vulnerable. It was not a grand victory. It was something worse for the Empire. It was embarrassing. And pride, once wounded, often bled more fiercely than flesh. Vorath stared at the image of the human ship holding position where it should have fled. Its hull was scarred now. One launch bay was burning. Several sections had gone dark. By all logic, the captain inside should have pulled back or begged terms. Instead, she stayed, still there, still refusing, still making his fleet look foolish in front of its own battle logs. "How many casualties?" he asked. "None confirmed, Commander. Structural and systems damage only." No dead. That should have comforted him. It did not.
because this was no longer about damage. It was about what the story of this fight would become once it spread. A Tier 7 species, a minor threat, a dismissed civilization with no proper place in galactic order. And yet here they were, defying the DVEC Empire and forcing 6 DVEC ships to fight for clean control of a single encounter. Vorath understood reputation. He had built his life on it, and he understood with growing fury that this battle was already poisoning his. On the human ship, warning sirens howled across multiple decks. Colonists sat in emergency braces, some crying quietly, some praying, some gripping the hands of strangers as if fear itself had made them family. Engineers raced through smoke-filled corridors. Medics treated burns and fractures near shattered bulkheads. Every part of the vessel trembled under stress. Captain Voss heard all of it through reports. She felt every second of it, but her face did not change, because if she broke, others would break faster. "How long can we hold this?" Osai asked softly. Voss looked at the display. She saw 6 ships that expected surrender. She saw confusion spreading among them like cracks under ice. And she made the hardest choice a commander can make when every instinct screams to escape. "Long enough," she said. Back on the Iron Tooth, Vorath finally gave the order he had been fighting inside himself since the first drone attached to his hull. "Withdraw." The bridge went silent. One officer looked up in disbelief before lowering his eyes again. No one challenged him, but everyone understood what that word meant. Withdrawal was not retreat in official language. It was repositioning, tactical reconsideration, controlled disengagement. But they all knew the truth. They were leaving, because a human colony ship had made staying too costly to justify. As the 6 DVEC ships pulled back and turned away, the Endeavor remained in place like a scar that refused to close. Damaged, outgunned, bruised, but standing. Vorath watched it until it shrank on his screen. Then he began drafting the report he never wanted to write. And far away, in the quiet halls of Old Power, that report was already moving toward leaders who still believed humanity was too small to matter. When the conclave finally read what happened at the frontier, they called it a minor border incident, but one analyst reading the report knew the galaxy's second mistake would be even worse than the first. When the conclave finally received Commander Vorath's report, they treated it like an inconvenience, not a crisis, not a turning point, not the first crack in an ancient wall, just a frontier problem wrapped in wounded pride and military frustration. The great chamber was quieter than usual that day. Delegates stood in clusters, discussing trade routes, mineral rights, and disputes that felt more familiar, more comfortable. The report on humanity was just one item among many, a single file in a sea of files. Archon Salaith read it in full. He noted the damaged DVEC ships. He noted the human drone swarm. He noted the refusal to surrender. He even paused for a moment at the description of Captain Alina Voss standing firm before 6 Imperial warships. Then he set the report down. "This is not a reclassification event," he said. A few heads lifted. Most did not. "It is a border dispute," Salaith continued. "No major casualties, no territory lost, no evidence of expansionist military doctrine. The species demonstrated unorthodox resistance, but not strategic threat." That was enough for most of the chamber. The matter should have ended there. But Tyne was in the room. He stood at the edge of the assembly, older now than when he had first presented Earth, but not old by the standards of those around him. Time had sharpened him. It had not made him louder, but it had made him harder to ignore. He requested permission to speak. Salaith allowed it with visible reluctance. Tyne stepped forward, his thin hands folded behind his back, his voice calm. "With respect," he said, A species classified as Tier 7 should not be able to resist 6 DVEC warships with a colony vessel. They should not possess a successful faster-than-light method outside known standards, and they should not be adapting military tools from civilian design at this rate. A murmur moved through the hall. Not agreement, annoyance. Korath, seated high among the Alinari delegates, looked down at him with tired patience. She had heard versions of this concern before. She had dismissed them before. "You are allowing novelty to distort judgment," she said. "Improvisation is not dominance. One successful defiance does not create a galactic threat." Tyne met her gaze. "No," he said quietly, "but it reveals potential." That word lingered in the air longer than anyone wanted. Potential. Not what humanity was, what it could become. Salith's tone cooled. Potential is not classification. We judge realities, not possibilities. Tyne wanted to say that all disasters begin as possibilities. He wanted to remind them that the most dangerous fire often starts as a spark too small to fear. But the chamber had already decided what kind of conversation this would be. It would be brief, controlled, safe. The ruling was entered. Humanity remained Tier 7, minor threat. The same label, the same blindness. Only now it was worse, because this time the galaxy had data and chose not to learn from it. After the session ended, delegates drifted out in waves of polished confidence. Trade ministers resumed quiet bargaining. Military envoys moved on to more respectable concerns. Humanity, once again, became something to file away. Tyne did not leave immediately. He took the updated report and returned alone to his office in the archive wing, where the walls were lined with the histories of species that had risen, failed, vanished, or changed the stars forever. He stood before the display of Earth for a long time. The data had become harder to dismiss. Population expansion beyond the home world, industrial output increasing faster than models predicted, drive innovation accelerating instead of stabilizing, and most troubling of all, a pattern that felt strangely human even in its simplicity. Every time they met resistance, they learned from it faster than expected. Tyne enlarged the frontier engagement files. He watched the drone behavior reports again. Not the damage, the thinking behind the damage. The drones had not been designed like standard galactic weapons. They had not aimed for elegant destruction or symbolic dominance. They had targeted sight, coordination, timing, rhythm. Humans had looked at stronger ships and asked the practical question no ancient empire had asked in too long. What is the fastest way to make power uncomfortable? That question unsettled him more than the battle itself, because it suggested something deeper than courage. It suggested a habit. He flagged the entire file for urgent review and sent a formal recommendation to Korath's office, requesting expanded observation, diplomatic contact, and immediate study of human technological growth models. 3 days later, the reply came back. Only one line. Classification confirmed. No further action required. Tyne stared at the message in silence. Then he closed it. Outside his office window, distant stars burned in cold patterns that outlived empires. Somewhere among them, humanity was building new ships, asking new questions, and moving forward with the restless force of a species that did not know how to stay in its place. And the galaxy, old, proud, and certain of itself, was still making the same mistake. It thought ignoring a problem kept it small. It did not understand that neglect can be the perfect place for dangerous things to grow. Tyne sat down slowly, folded his hands, and looked once more at the blue world turning on his screen. This time, the fear inside him felt clearer. Humanity was not dangerous because it was cruel. It was dangerous because it was hungry, inventive, emotional, impatient, and alive in ways the old powers had forgotten how to be. And if the galaxy waited until that truth became obvious, then the cost of learning it would be far greater than pride. While the conclave buried the warning, humanity stepped into the next stage of its rise, and this time it would not be war that would make the galaxy uneasy, but friendship. While the conclave buried the warning, humanity moved into a stage the old powers understood even less than war. It began quietly, not with fleets, not with speeches, not with banners rising over conquered worlds. It began with trade ships. Small human freighters started appearing in forgotten markets and distant stations where the proud species of the galaxy rarely bothered to look. Their hulls were practical and plain. Their cargo was useful, cheap, and sometimes unimpressive at first glance. But human merchants brought something unusual with them: time, attention, and a strange willingness to listen. They learned names, they remembered customs, they asked questions and waited for honest answers. In places where larger powers offered terms, humans offered interest. In places where old empires demanded obedience, humans suggested cooperation. It felt soft, unthreatening, even a little naive. That was why so many failed to see the danger. Because humanity was not trying to be feared, it was learning how to be needed. The first major shift came through the Ralethi, a small amphibian species from a wet green world rich in biological science and poor in leverage. For generations, stronger traders had used them, buying their engineered materials at insultingly low rates and selling finished products back at impossible prices. It was exploitation wrapped in legal language. Then a human delegation arrived. It was led by Ambassador Priya Sharma, a woman with warm eyes, a sharp mind, and the dangerous habit of speaking plainly. She sat before the Ralethi Council, listened to their concerns, reviewed their trade history, and then offered terms so fair that the elders assumed there had to be a trick hidden somewhere. There was none. Humanity would share manufacturing systems. The Ralethi would share bioengineering knowledge. Both sides would profit. Both sides would retain control. Both sides would grow. The council asked for clarification 3 times. Sharma answered the same way each time. We do better when you do better. That sentence changed more than the agreement itself. Within a few cycles, the Ralethi were no longer trapped suppliers. They were active partners. Their products improved. Their incomes rose. Their dependence on older trade powers began to break. And somewhere far away, Korvathi merchants started noticing numbers they did not like. The Korvathi syndicate had built an empire on commerce, contracts, pressure, and perfect calculation. They were masters of profit. They had centuries of experience controlling weak markets, but they were not prepared for the human method. Humans did not always win with superior goods. Sometimes they won because people liked dealing with them more. That fact offended the syndicate almost as much as the lost money. Director Kovacs stood in his office, reviewing reports from 3 sectors where Korvathi profit had dropped sharply. Every chart pointed to the same cause: human partnerships, human flexibility, human pricing, human habits of creating loyalty before dependency. He hated all of it, especially because it worked. And the Ralethi were not the only example. The Fenric, a sharp-sensed species long ignored by major powers, signed a mutual support pact with humanity after human engineers helped stabilize their failing atmospheric systems. The Thesic, crystalline beings known for material science but little cultural influence, entered joint research agreements after humans offered not only knowledge, exchange but art, music, stories, and shared learning. That part confused everyone. Why would a rising civilization spend time sharing songs and books and films when it could focus on ships and borders? The answer, though few saw it yet, was simple. Humans understood something ancient civilizations had forgotten. People do not defend only what protects them, they defend what touches them. And human culture touched everything. Music spread first, because it always does, then stories, then films, then ideas. Small conversations began on worlds where no one had ever seriously questioned the belief that power gave value. Human diplomats, merchants, teachers, and engineers kept repeating dangerous little thoughts in ordinary voices, that every thinking being mattered, that dignity was not a reward for strength, that cooperation could be stronger than fear. By the time those ideas started making old rulers uncomfortable, they had already taken root. Somewhere along the trade routes, someone began calling this growing network of smaller allied species the minor threats. It started as a joke, most likely a human joke, because humans had the strange habit of mocking the insults once used against them. The name spread, and the joke became a coalition. Tyan watched all of this with a tightening feeling in his chest. By now, he was no longer a junior analyst. He had earned rank, respect, and a small research team of his own. Over the years, he had studied human history, literature, conflict patterns, family structures, psychology, trade behavior, and political development. The more he learned, the less he slept easily, because humanity was doing exactly what no old empire expected. It was not expanding like a conqueror, it was expanding like rain, quietly, constantly, filling empty places, making things grow. And when growth came, loyalty followed. At last, Tyan requested a formal hearing before the conclave. This time they granted it, not because they finally respected his warnings, but because too many economic complaints had begun circling around the same species to ignore. He stood again in the great chamber where humanity had once been dismissed in a single breath. Now the room was fuller. Now more eyes were watching. Now the old powers were beginning at last to feel something close to discomfort. And Tyan knew this hearing mattered, because if they still failed to understand what humanity had become, the next lesson would not come through trade reports, it would come through fire. When Tyan finally spoke before the conclave again, he did not warn them that humanity was getting stronger. He warned them that humanity was making the galaxy change around it.
When Tyan finally stood before the conclave again, the chamber did not feel the same. Years ago, he had spoken as a young analyst, asking powerful beings to take a small new species seriously. Back then, most of the room had barely listened. Some had laughed. Others had looked past him as if Earth were already yesterday's problem. Now the hall was full. Every seat was taken. Trade envoys watched with sharp eyes. Military delegates sat straighter than usual. Even species that normally avoided general sessions had sent observers. No one was laughing this time, because humanity had stopped being easy to ignore. Tyan stepped to the center platform, calm on the outside, though he could feel the pressure in the air like storm weight before lightning. Behind him, the display awakened. A map of the mid-rim spread across the chamber in blue lines and bright points. Human colonies, trade lanes, defense pacts, cultural exchanges, shared research stations. The web had become too large to dismiss. Humanity now maintains colonies in more than 30 systems, Tyan began. They hold formal trade agreements with dozens of species, active research partnerships across multiple sectors, and mutual defense understandings that continue to expand. No one interrupted. That was new, too.
He changed the display. The lines between worlds brightened. "This is not random growth," he said. "It is a pattern." He highlighted the Relathi partnership first. A species once held in economic dependence is now a competitive regional producer because humans invested in their development instead of trapping them in debt. The image changed. "The Fenric sensor network," Tyan continued, "once limited by infrastructure weakness, now among the most effective in their region due to shared engineering support." Another shift. "The Thesic material exchange, their crystal composites, improved through joint human research, are already outperforming systems used in several established fleets." That finally caused movement. A few DVEC delegates exchanged dark looks. Korvathi representatives stopped pretending to study private financial screens. The room was listening now, not out of kindness, but because the evidence had grown too sharp to soften. Tyan let the silence deepen before speaking again. "Every major power in this chamber specializes," he said. "One dominates warfare, another commerce, another psionics, another resource extraction. Humanity does not dominate any single field to the same extreme. That is precisely the problem." He paused. "They are good at almost everything, and they improve faster than any model predicted." The words settled heavily. That was the thing old civilizations feared most. Not an enemy with one great strength, but one that learned everywhere at once. Tyan moved closer to the center of the platform. His voice remained measured, but the force inside it had changed. This was no longer a cautious recommendation. It was a warning sharpened by time. Humans reverse engineer quickly. They adapt socially. They absorb systems, study failures, and build again. When they meet a stronger power, they do not simply resist it. They examine it. They learn its habits. Then they return better prepared. He saw the reaction ripple across the chamber. Not panic, recognition. And recognition was sometimes more frightening. Then Tyan showed them the part that numbers alone could not explain. The map vanished. In its place appeared fragments of translated human music, literature, films, exchange networks, and legal forums. Human ideas were spreading across worlds that had never shared much of anything before. "The deepest change is not military," he quietly said. "It is cultural." That made several older delegates visibly uncomfortable. He continued anyway. "Human stories are being translated across sectors. Their art is being exchanged among species that once had no contact beyond trade. Their political language, especially around rights, dignity, and mutual value, is being discussed in systems where power has always determined worth." A low murmur moved through the chamber. There it was, the real fear. Not human ships, not even human technology, human thought. Because a fleet can threaten a border, an idea can threaten an order. Tyan looked up toward the higher seats, where Archon Salaith watched with unreadable stillness. Near him sat High Seer Quarith, older now, slower, but more attentive than she had ever been during the first hearing. Time had thinned neither her intelligence nor her pride, but it had put weight on both. "I believe humanity has been fundamentally misclassified," Tyan said, "not because they conquer worlds, but because they transform relationships between them. They do not always seize power directly. More often, they make others stronger beside them." He drew a breath, and by the time larger powers recognize the shift, the balance has already changed. That was the line that truly chilled the room, because many of them, at that exact moment, were beginning to realize he was right. The debate began the moment he stepped back. Korvathi speakers complained of destabilized markets. DVEC voices demanded a threat increase based on military unpredictability. Others argued that trade growth and cultural spread did not justify panic. Some wanted caution, some wanted containment. A few wanted humanity approached with formal diplomacy before things moved beyond further control. Then High Seer Quarith rose. The hall fell silent almost instantly. She moved slowly, carrying the weight of age with severe dignity. For a long moment she looked at Tyan, then at the chamber, then at the blue human systems burning quietly on the display. When this species was first presented, I judged it by lifespan. No one moved. I assumed brevity meant limitation. I assumed fragility meant insignificance. Her voice remained calm, but something inside it had changed. Not weakness, not surrender, something rarer, honesty. I was wrong. The silence that followed felt enormous. Tyan did not blink, neither did anyone else. The oldest certainty in the room had just cracked in public. But Quarith was not finished. I do not support panic, but I support reclassification. Humanity is no longer a minor threat. Humanity is a developing regional force. When the vote finally came, it was long, bitter, and close. The result? Tier 5, moderate concern. More monitoring, more observation, still no full diplomatic recognition, still no true understanding. A compromise, and like most compromises born too late, it pleased no one. Tyan returned to his office after the session exhausted but unable to rest. He began writing that same night, putting down the conclusion the conclave still refused to speak plainly. He chose his final words with care. They do not conquer worlds, they make worlds need them. By the time you notice the dependency, it is already too late. When he finished, he sat in silence and stared at the stars beyond his window. Somewhere out there, humanity was still growing, still learning, still pulling forgotten species into its orbit without chains, without conquest, and without asking permission from the old order. And in a distant war room, someone in the Devek Empire had already decided the conclave was too slow, too soft, too blind. She was gathering a fleet, and when they reached Vanguard Station, the galaxy would finally see what happened when fear struck first. Far from the debating halls of the conclave, Warlord Caldrus was preparing 800 warships, and when they reached Vanguard Station, the galaxy would finally see what happened when fear struck first. Far from the debating halls of the conclave, Warlord Caldrus was not interested in theory, patience, or compromise. She believed in force, and force, used early and without mercy, had built the Devek Empire into one of the oldest powers in the galaxy. So while others argued about humanity's future, Caldrus prepared to end it. Her fleet gathered in silence across dark space, more than 800 warships, enough to crush frontier systems, burn stations, and send a message so brutal that no minor species would ever dream of resisting again. Sovereign-class cruisers formed the core. Siege dreadnoughts waited behind them like moving mountains. Attack wings spread wide on both sides, ready to close like claws around a throat. At the center of it all stood Caldrus on the bridge of her flagship, the Burning Claw, watching the tactical display glow red with power. She had studied everything. The drone swarm used at the frontier, the strange human fold drives, the growing coalition, the trade webs, the cultural spread. To her, it all meant one thing. Humanity was a problem that should have been crushed while it was still small. Now she would correct that failure herself. Their target was Vanguard Station. It orbited a hard, distant world like a rough metal fist, built more for endurance than beauty. No polished towers, no sacred halls, no elegant alien design. It was human in the plainest way, welded, practical, reinforced, scarred by use, and built to keep working under pressure. Admiral James Holden stood in its command center when the first reports came in. He was 57, gray at the temples, calm by discipline rather than nature. He had seen enough battle, to know that fear was not weakness, it was information. And the moment he saw the scale of the incoming fleet, fear settled into him like cold iron. "How many?" he asked. His tactical officer swallowed before answering. 812 confirmed warships, Admiral. More still dropping in. The room went still. Somewhere deeper in the station, civilians still moved through ordinary routines. Families lived here, technicians, dock workers, medics, children. It was a defense station, yes, but it was also a home. Holden looked at the display and made the only choice his conscience could live with. Signal the coalition. All defense wings to combat positions. Launch full drone reserves and open a channel to their commander. Caldress appeared on the main screen, huge and severe, her scaled face unreadable except for the certainty in her eyes. She looked like someone who had already finished the battle in her mind. "Admiral," she said through the translator, "you are surrounded. Surrender the station, the fleet, and all associated colonies in this sector. I will permit civilian evacuation." Holden studied her for a moment. There it was, the old Empire offer. Mercy with chains attached. He spoke quietly, but every person on the bridge heard the steel in his voice. "There are families here." "Then you should have surrendered before I arrived," Cowdress replied. Behind Holden, nobody moved. He could have lied, he could have stalled, he could have begged for time. Instead, he gave the only answer that still sounded human. "This station does not belong to you. Neither do the people behind it. We're not leaving." Cowdress's expression did not change. Then the channel closed. On every level of Vanguard Station, alarms exploded into life. Red lights flooded halls, blast doors slammed shut, pilots ran, engineers sealed sections, mothers grabbed children, soldiers checked weapons with shaking hands they forced to stay steady. Outside, the DVEC fleet shifted into attack formation, a red wall of metal and fire moving toward the station. Admiral Holden stood straight, even with death on the screen in front of him. He knew the numbers, he knew the odds, he knew this battle could not be won in any clean or simple way. But humans had never built their history on clean odds. Sometimes they built it by refusing to move. When the first DVEC barrage hit Vanguard Station, the galaxy expected humanity to break. But what happened in the hours that followed would become the battle no empire could ever forget.
When the first DVEC barrage struck Vanguard Station, the entire structure shook like a living thing hit in the chest. Blue-white plasma smashed against the outer shield layer in waves so bright that space itself seemed to flash. Deep inside the station, lights flickered, metal groaned, and dust rained from the ceiling. On residential decks, children screamed. In medical bays, stretchers rolled loose until nurses caught them. In maintenance shafts, engineers grabbed pipes and rails to keep from being thrown across the walls. The attack had begun, and from the first minute, it was brutal. Admiral Holden stood in the command center with both hands braced on the tactical rail, watching red enemy markers spread across the display like a stain. The DVEC fleet advanced in hard, disciplined layers. Siege ships stayed back and pounded the station from range. Cruiser wings rotated in perfect order. Strike craft carved through open space between human defenders, hitting weak points, then pulling away before return fire could lock properly. It was not rage, it was method. That made it worse. "Shield integrity," asked Holden. 82% and dropping fast. "Drone losses. First wave took heavy hits. EMP bursts are tearing them apart before they can fully form." That too had been prepared for. Caldress had studied humanity well enough to know the drone swarms had to be broken early.
New electromagnetic weapons burst across the void in expanding pulses, frying circuits, collapsing coordination, and turning clouds of clever machines into dead fragments drifting through space. For the first 3 hours, the battle went almost exactly the way the DVEC wanted. Human ships launched in staggered formations and were cut down in clusters. Missile barges fired until their tubes ran dry. Railguns lit the dark with angry silver lines. Station batteries answered again and again, but the return fire was never enough. There were simply too many enemy ships, too many firing angles, too much force pressing on too few defenders. By the 4th hour, Vanguard Station's outer shields failed. The alert tone that followed was flat, final, and terrible. Hull sections opened to vacuum on 3 levels. Fire raced along a lower maintenance corridor. One docking ring lost pressure so fast that 23 workers died before emergency doors sealed the breach. In the command center, a young officer took a report from her brother's section, went pale, and kept doing her job because there was no time to grieve. That was the shape of the battle. Personal loss swallowed by larger necessity, again and again. And still, the humans did not stop. Pilots launched from half-damaged bays. Medics treated wounded in hallways when rooms filled too quickly. Repair crews ran into sections everyone knew might not hold. A young systems engineer named Kenji Sato crawled into a melting relay shaft to reroute power from a destroyed weapons grid to a surviving defense cluster. When asked later why he did not wait for backup, he said the same thing many humans said when fear was too large to explain. There was a job, so he did it. That was one truth the galaxy had never learned to measure. Humans did not always decide whether something was possible before attempting it. Often they acted first, endured second, and left logic struggling to catch up. On the Burning Claw, Warlord Caldrus watched the damage reports with grim satisfaction. This was the result she had expected. This was what happened when a rising species forgot its place. Human resistance was fierce, yes, emotional, admirable perhaps in a narrow way, but still doomed. She had seen this moment many times in older campaigns. There came a point in every siege when defenders finally understood the mathematics against them, when hope gave way to fact, when the firing slowed, surrender channels opened, and courage bent beneath reality. She waited for that moment. It did not come. Instead, the humans fought harder. Even with fires burning through station decks, even with casualties rising too quickly to verify cleanly. Smoke filled entire compartments. Emergency triage zones spilled into storage halls and transit corridors. Holden looked at the tactical screen and knew exactly how bad it was. No clean reinforcement path, no hidden fleet, no miracle waiting in silence. Just pain, numbers, and time running out. Still, he did not order surrender. He opened a station-wide channel instead. His voice was tired, steady, and very human. "This is Admiral Holden. I won't lie to you. We are taking heavy losses, but every minute we hold matters. Every ship we delay matters. Every person we protect matters. Stay with each other. Stay at your stations if you can. Help whoever is beside you. We hold." That message moved through the station like a second pulse. Not cheerful, not heroic in the bright, foolish way stories sometimes imagine, just honest. And honesty, in moments like that, can keep people standing. Outside, the DVAC attack waves shifted again for the next crushing push. Inside, the defenders prepared for another hour they had no right to survive. And then, from the far edge of the battle space, new contacts appeared on long-range sensors. At first, the tactical team thought it was a reading error. Then more signatures arrived. Then more. Holden looked up sharply as the confirmation came through. Not human ships, not DVEC reinforcements, something else. something Caldrus had not expected to arrive in time. As Vanguard Station burned and bled, the first Allied ships dropped from faster-than-light travel behind the Devek fleet, and the battle that should have ended in defeat suddenly became something far more dangerous. As Vanguard Station burned and bled, the first Allied ships tore out of faster-than-light travel behind the Devek fleet. For one heartbeat, nobody understood what they were seeing. Then the tactical screens updated. New contacts, dozens, then hundreds, not human, not Imperial, Allied. On Vanguard Station, exhausted officers stared at the displays as if they were afraid hope itself might be a sensor glitch. Admiral Holden leaned forward, eyes fixed, pulse hammering once in a way he had forced himself not to feel for hours. "And identify them," he said. The answer came back almost at once. "Relethi bioships confirmed." A second voice followed. "Fenric electronic warfare wings entering the field." Then a third, almost disbelieving. "Thessic heavy support carriers behind them." For the first time since the battle began, something changed in the room. Not relief, not yet, but movement inside despair, a crack in it. On the bridge of the Burning Claw, Warlord Caldrus felt her jaw tighten. Her intelligence had said coalition forces were too far away, too scattered, too slow. Humanity's allies should not have been here, not now, not in numbers that mattered. But they were here, and they had not come for negotiation. The Relethi struck first. Their ships did not look like war machines by Imperial standards. They were grown more than built, shaped from living biological structures reinforced into fleet-capable forms. They moved through space with an eerie grace, and when they released their weapons systems, the Devek crews reacted with open confusion. Clouds of engineered spores spilled into the dark like pale mist. They drifted over halls, clung to sensor frames, and spread fast across exposed systems. The growth did not melt armor or tear into living tissue. It did something more precise. It covered optical arrays, clogged intake housings, and formed dense biological films over targeting surfaces. Devek ships tried to burn it away with plasma bursts, but the heat risked destroying their own equipment. In minutes, visibility across sections of the fleet dropped sharply. The Fenric arrived howling. Their ships were small, fast, and built around signal warfare. They hit the battle space like a storm of noise. Communications bands overloaded. Formation coordination channels broke into shrieking interference. Formation timing collapsed in places where the Devek had once moved with machine-like order. Captains lost clean contact with escorts. Attack waves drifted apart. Commands repeated, delayed, or vanished entirely. The Empire's strength had always depended on discipline. The Fenric did not need to outgun that discipline. They only needed to make it stumble. Then came the Thessic. No one expected much from them in battle. They were known for crystal growth, material science, and patience, not war. But what dropped into the fight behind the first Allied waves changed everything. Massive support carriers pushed forward under fire and locked onto Vanguard Station's ruined outer sections. From their holds came layered crystal plating, fabricated in advance and shaped for emergency reinforcement. Under bombardment, Thessic engineers began attaching the armor directly onto damaged station surfaces while fighting still raged around them. Plasma fire hit the new crystal shell and spread through it in glowing waves instead of cutting through cleanly. Sections of the station that should have failed held. Not comfortably, not safely, but long enough. And in a battle like this, long enough could become destiny. Admiral Holden watched the tactical display transform by the minute. The red wall that had pressed inward with terrible certainty was no longer smooth. It had breaks now, blind zones, crossed communications, confused repositioning. Human commanders, bloodied and exhausted, began doing what humans did best under pressure. They learned fast. "Track the stagger in the DVEC wing rotation," Holden ordered. His tactical staff was already doing it. Thousands of combat points from the opening hours had been fed into predictive systems and live analysis models. Patterns emerged. The Empire's attack doctrine had been elegant, disciplined, repeatable. And now it was visible. Lead ships committed first. Support angles followed. Rear protection opened predictable timing gaps whenever communications lagged. The moment humans saw the pattern, they began cutting into it. Damaged frigates swung into positions that made no sense until seconds later, when DVEC formations arrived exactly where the models predicted. Missile salvos hit transition points. Drone remnants were redirected into sensor-blind arcs. Station batteries stopped reacting and started anticipating. By the 14th hour, human pilots were no longer simply surviving the assault. They were reading it. By the 20th hour, Caldress stood on her bridge and realized the battle had become something she had never intended. Not a purge, not a lesson, a contest. And worse than that, a contest she was no longer certain of winning. Her intelligence still fed her damage reports. Human losses remained severe. Vanguard Station was still half ruined. Coalition ships were dying too. Space was choked with debris, fire, broken hulls, frozen air, and metal fragments tumbling through the dark like the remains of shattered certainty. But now, DVEC losses were rising in numbers no one on that bridge wanted to speak too loudly. Cruisers disabled, command ships blinded, coordinated attack lanes broken apart, entire formations forced onto defensive adjustments by species they had once mocked as secondary powers. This was not what Empire was supposed to look like. For 31 hours, the battle raged. Vanguard Station died piece by piece. Its outer body burned. Whole sections went dark forever. Thousands paid for every hour with blood, smoke, silence, and names that would later be carved on memorial walls. But the station did not surrender, and neither did the fleet. When the final withdrawal order passed through the surviving DVEC lines, it moved like poison through the Empire's pride. Ships turned away under fire. Dreadnoughts pulled back. Escort wings broke formation and ran cover for retreat paths instead of attack approaches. They were leaving. Not because they had destroyed nothing, not because they had lost everything, but because they had failed to break what was supposed to bend. Afterward, the wreckage drifted across orbit like the remains of a storm. Vanguard Station was dying. Human and allied losses were terrible. So were the Empire's. More than 200 DVEC warships were gone, crippled or abandoned to the field. For the oldest military power in the region, it was not just a defeat, it was a wound to identity. And in the middle of that ruined dark, one battered human frigate with half its systems dead and its hull scorched nearly black, opened a broad channel and broadcast a message across every frequency it could still reach. Vanguard is gone. We are still here. The signal spread to stations, to traders, to diplomats, to worlds that never cared about humanity before that moment. And as it traveled, the galaxy began to understand that something had changed forever. When the Conclave gathered in emergency session after Vanguard, they didn't argue about whether humanity mattered anymore. They argued about how badly they had misjudged it. When the Conclave gathered after Vanguard, the chamber felt different from any session in living memory. No one came in relaxed. No one stood in easy little circles talking about trade or border taxes or routine classifications. The Great Hall, once so proud of its calm traditions, now carried a feeling much closer to shock. News of the battle had crossed the galaxy already. Everyone had seen the images. The broken station, the drifting wreckage, the blackened human frigate still sending its message into the dark. Vanguard is gone. We are still here. That sentence had done more damage to the old order than many fleets could have done in a century. Archon Salith stood at the center platform, but the confidence he had worn for so long looked thinner now. Around him sat delegates from powers that had once believed time itself was on their side. Now they looked like people who had just realized history could move without asking their permission. The emergency reports were displayed in sequence. Human losses, severe. Coalition losses, severe. Vanguard Station, destroyed. DEVC losses, catastrophic by Imperial standards. That last part held the room in silence. More than 200 warships lost, crippled, or abandoned. For a military power that had defined itself through control and fear for thousands of cycles, this was not just a battlefield failure, it was public humiliation on a galactic scale. Salith finally spoke. Humanity is reclassified effective immediately. Tier 2, existential concern. Even hearing the words out loud sent a ripple through the chamber. Tier 7, minor threat. Tier 2, existential concern. The distance between those two judgments felt less like an error and more like an accusation. For once, there was almost no debate. That was how serious the moment had become. Delegates who normally argued over language, procedure, and political advantage now looked only at the reports and understood the same ugly truth. They had not merely underestimated humanity, they had trained it. Every dismissal, every insult, every refusal to engage honestly, every attempt to push or ignore or exploit smaller species had helped create the coalition now standing against them. Worse, humanity had not risen alone. That was the part the old powers found hardest to face. If humans had simply become another empire, the Conclave would have known what to do. Empires could be measured, threatened, fought, balanced against one another. But this was something else. Humanity had made allies out of species the galaxy had taught itself not to notice. And when the moment came, those allies had answered, not because they were forced, because they chose to. That terrified the chamber more than any weapon report. Tyon was called forward soon after the vote. He had waited years for the galaxy to see clearly, but there was no triumph in him now, only a tired sadness. He accepted the role they offered, leader of the first full diplomatic envoy to Earth. It should have happened long ago. As the chamber slowly emptied, a frail hand caught his arm. High Seer Quoreth stood beside him. Age had finally bent her. The powerful certainty that once filled a room around her had faded into something quieter. But her eyes were clear, and for the first time since Tyon had known her, there was no distance in them, no superiority, only honesty. "I studied 10,000 species," she said softly, "and I ignored the one that had the least time to waste." Tyon said nothing. She looked toward the fading display of Earth. "They are fragile," she whispered. "That is what blinded us. We thought brief lives meant small impact, but short lives create urgency. Urgency creates movement, and movement changes worlds." Her grip loosened. "They do not wait the way we do," she said. "That is why they are dangerous." Then she let go. Tyon watched her walk away and understood that the galaxy was already changing faster than its elders could bear. The envoy to Earth would be a beginning, yes, but not a simple one, because now the old powers were finally coming not from pride, but from fear. When Tyon's ship finally descended toward Earth, he was arriving at a place where the future of the galaxy had already begun. When Tyon's ship descended toward Earth, he expected tension. He expected defenses, suspicion, maybe even anger. After all, the galaxy had ignored humanity, mocked it, misjudged it, and then sent a fleet large enough to erase one of its stations. If any species had earned the right to greet outsiders with bitterness, it was this one. But Earth did not welcome him with hatred. It welcomed him with noise. Cities shone beneath the clouds in bright webs of light. Oceans reflected the sun in sheets of gold. Orbit above the planet was crowded with stations, transports, defense platforms, scientific arrays, and civilian traffic moving in patterns so busy they seemed almost chaotic. Yet somehow it all worked. It was not graceful like the ancient worlds of the great powers. It was alive. That was the first thing Tyan truly understood as he looked down at Earth. Not advanced, not dangerous, not impressive. Alive. More alive than any world he had ever seen. His shuttle landed near Geneva, where the first formal diplomatic summit had been arranged. The city sat between water and mountains, calm on the surface, though security around the summit was impossible to miss. Human guards stood beside allied representatives from Relethi, Fenric, and Thessic worlds. Not hidden, not ashamed. Together. That mattered. It was not a performance. It was a statement. When Tyan stepped out, cameras turned. Observers watched. Officials waited. At the center of the welcoming group stood a human woman in a dark, formal coat, silver at her temples, posture straight, eyes steady. Admiral Alina Voss. Older now, worn by years and loss, but still carrying the same quiet strength that had once stared down an empire from the bridge of the Endeavor. She walked toward him and stopped at a respectful distance. "Welcome to Earth, Analyst Tyan," she said. Her voice was calm, almost warm. Tyan looked at her for a moment before answering. "I believe I am very late." A faint smile touched her face. "You are, but you still made it." It was such a human answer that Tyan almost laughed. Not cruel, not triumphant, just honest. Over the weeks that followed, he met scholars, military officers, engineers, artists, diplomats, labor organizers, children, and veterans from the defense of Vanguard. He toured research centers and memorial halls. He stood before names carved into black stone and watched families leave flowers beneath them. He visited classrooms where human and allied children studied together. He listened to arguments in cafes, watched music performances in public squares, and sat through long policy meetings where humans disagreed loudly, passionately, and often with more emotion than discipline. And slowly, the final truth settled into him. The galaxy had misunderstood humanity from the beginning because it kept asking the wrong question. It asked, how dangerous are they? But danger was only part of the answer. The real question had always been, what happens when a species refuses to believe power is the only thing that gives value? The answer was now all around him. Worlds speaking to each other that had once only traded under pressure. Species helping one another without chains hidden in the contract. Children growing up with languages, songs, and friendships that would have been impossible only a few generations earlier. Humanity had not simply survived the galaxy, it had changed the emotional shape of it. And that was why the old powers had feared it so deeply. Not because humans were perfect, they were not. Tyan had seen their divisions, their grief, their anger, and their mistakes. They were impulsive, stubborn, contradictory, and often exhausting. But they kept reaching outward anyway, again and again. That was their gift, and their threat. When Tyan finally returned to the conclave for the last time, the chamber listened before he even spoke. The old arrogance was gone. Not fully, not forever, but enough. He stepped onto the platform and opened his final report. "I have lived among humans," he said. "I have studied them for most of my life. I have watched them in war, in trade, in grief, in art, in negotiation, in family life, and in recovery. I now submit my final conclusion." The chamber was silent. Tyan looked across the ancient faces before him and spoke clearly. "Humanity is not dangerous because it is the strongest species in the galaxy. He paused. It is dangerous because it teaches others they matter. No one moved. No one interrupted. So he continued. You believed power created order. Humanity proved that connection can create a stronger one. You believed fear held civilizations together. Humanity proved trust can spread farther. You believed small species remained small. Humanity proved that all neglected things grow when finally given light. He closed the report. The age of classification is ending, not because humanity destroyed it, because humanity made it obsolete. That was the last great speech of his career. And in the cycles that followed, the galaxy changed in ways no council vote could fully control. The DEVC empire fractured, reformed, and slowly learned that respect worked better than intimidation. The Korvathi syndicate adapted, as merchants always did, and became richer than ever by working with the very species they had once dismissed. The Alonari turned inward for a time, rethinking old beliefs that had survived too long without challenge, and the compact of free species grew, not through conquest, not through fear, but because more and more worlds wanted in. Years later, on a quiet afternoon in a park in Geneva, an elderly Alina Voss sat on a bench beneath gold leaves, drifting down in the wind. Children ran across the grass nearby, human, Relethi, Fenric, and Thesic, laughing in a mix of voices and languages that would have sounded impossible together only a few generations earlier. A small Relethi child approached her carefully. "Are you Captain Voss?" she asked. Voss smiled. "I was, a long time ago." The child climbed onto the bench beside her. "What was it like fighting for the stars?" Voss looked out at the sky, bright above the trees. Then she answered in the simplest way she could. "We did not fight for the stars. We fought for each other. The stars were just where it happened." The child seemed to think about that very seriously. Then, satisfied, they leaned against her side and kept watching the sky. Far beyond Earth, at the cold edge of the old solar boundary, the forgotten Conclave satellite still drifted in silence. Its systems were failing now. Its memory was damaged. Its code was ancient. Yet it kept sending the same outdated status signal into a queue no one checked anymore. Species 4217C. Minor threat. Recommend update. No one ever corrected it. And somehow that felt right, because the galaxy had once reduced humanity to a number and been wrong in every possible way. Humanity was never a minor threat. It had been something far more powerful, a beginning. The old galaxy believed strength meant making others kneel. Humanity taught a different lesson. The strongest future is the one that helps others rise. May this message strengthen your faith and renew your hope. Thank you for staying until the end. If this touched your heart, like, share, and subscribe to Astro Realms for more uplifting content. May God's blessings overflow in your life. See you soon.